Europe, from pride to pragmatism, Natter stories. Europe, once a beacon of civilization, soft power, and lofty humanitarian slogans like freedom, democracy, fraternity, is now stepping onto the global stage with a somewhat humbler posture. Bowed heads, bent knees, and bargaining. Yes, bargaining. From Beijing to Scotland. This past week, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Charles Michel embarked on a diplomatic journey to remember. It started with a polite knock on Beijing's door, hoping Chinese President Xi Jinping would give them an ear. The EU's demands were not modest. China should distance itself from Russia, even the Greats of Mexico. Stop flooding global markets with cheap and efficient goods. And, of course, free Xinjiang, Tibet and Hong Kong, a refrain echoed by Western rights advocates for years. President Xi's response? Not many words, but loud action. The EU delegation was sent off in what looked like a modest 16-seater electric van. At least they upheld environmental commitments. Round 2, home turf, Scotland. Ursula wasn't giving up just yet. This time, the mission was a trade negotiation with former President Donald Trump. But this is Donald Trump, a man famously known for negotiating without crumbs left behind. And yes, he lived up to the reputation. Trump welcomed Ursula with polite formalities, then landed the deal with force. The deal that tasted like humble pie. So, what did this EU-US deal actually look like? Let's unwrap it. Trump stood beside Ursula and graciously praised her efforts. She's done great things. For Europe. Not for us, he added, just in case anyone mistook kindness for weakness. Then came the terms. The European Union will purchase $750 billion worth of American energy. The EU will also invest $600 billion in the US economy. All EU countries will open their markets, dropping tariffs on American goods. Oh, and they'll buy more American military equipment, because why not? Meanwhile, Trump made one thing crystal clear. No wind turbines. They're ugly, they ruin our valleys, and mess with our beautiful plains. You heard it here first. Beauty standards for windmills are now part of foreign policy. And Europe? They got a tax cut. US tariffs on EU goods will drop from 30% down to a modest 15%. Now, European media outlets, in full PR mode, spun it as a win-win. Some even dared call it a balanced compromise. But wait a minute. 2 weeks ago, these same outlets had described that exact 15% tariff as extortion and a humiliation no proud European should accept. Fast forward to now? Apparently, pride has a very flexible definition. The hidden costs. And who pays? Serious though. Let's be blunt. This wasn't a trade deal. It was a wake-up call, delivered with a firm handshake and a silent invoice. Behind the numbers, here's what the EU actually gave up. They'll have to buy liquefied natural gas and nuclear energy from the US, both more expensive than Russian supplies. They agreed to inject hundreds of billions of dollars into the US economy, dollars that nobody seems to know where they'll come from. In return, access to the US market, which, let's be honest, the EU already had, albeit with a few trade hurdles. So, where's the money coming from? Will the German Chancellor foot the bill? A French president? Or maybe Hungary wants to make a generous donation? No, it's likely European taxpayers, as usual, who'll bear the cost. Some European officials did speak up, half-heartedly. I support the deal, though not with enthusiasm, one admitted. Translation, we signed it, but don't ask us why. And as for the 15% tariff, the very one that was once described as unacceptable theft, now it's being welcomed like an overdue compromise. Because when the choice is 15% tax or 30% tax, suddenly 15% feels like a bargain. But this goes deeper than numbers. It signals a shift in the global economic hierarchy, with Europe no longer in the driver's seat, but riding shotgun and occasionally being asked to fuel cost us too. Japan's shadow, Europe's future. If all of this sounds familiar, well, it should. Because this isn't the first time the US has clipped the wings of one of its close allies. Pause. Just ask Japan. Back in the day, Japan was on fire. Economically, not literally. It was dominating the tech and auto industries. Too dominant, perhaps. Then came the Plaza Accord, trade deals, and a few polite diplomatic smiles. Next thing you know, Japan's miracle economy was tamed, politely put to sleep, with no alarm clock in sight. And now? Serious tone. Europe seems to be walking the same path. Eyes open, wallet open wider. The EU is handing over billions in investments to the US, buying expensive American energy, initial trade barriers, with no clear benefit in return. Meanwhile, Washington stays firm. Drone wind turbines allowed. They ruin the landscape because, apparently, aesthetics now trump energy independence. So let's recap. Europe got outplayed in Beijing, got outbargained in Scotland, and now may be getting outmaneuvered globally. The continent once called the cradle of modern civilization is looking more like an ATM with a passport. And yet, the headlines still say, mutual agreement reached. Neutral? Maybe. Equal? You be the judge. Sovereignty for sale. The cost of dependence. Now here's the real question Europe has to ask itself. What exactly does sovereignty mean when you're not even sure who controls your budget? Let's break this down. Under the new agreement, Europe will invest over $600 billion into the US economy. Another $750 billion goes into buying American energy. All US goods enter Europe tax-free, so what's left for Europe? A firm handshake, a pat on the back, maybe a free Trump hat. And while we're at it, whose money is this? Because last time we checked, the European Commission doesn't actually print euros. So this must come from the member states. Germany, France, Hungary. We're just imagining the group chat now. Hey guys, who wants to pitch in 200 billion euros for Ursula's trip to America? In reality, this isn't a deal. It's a repositioning of Europe's role, from economic peer to political satellite, from union of nations to union of dependents. Even those in favour of the deal admit it was driven more by necessity than strategy. Because with the Ukraine crisis draining EU resources, and with China shutting the door, Washington's become the only house left for the lights on. But at what cost? Europe is paying premium rates for American gas, weapons, and access. Meanwhile, its own citizens are dealing with soaring inflation, energy shortages, a weakening industrial base, and the price of sovereignty, apparently somewhere around $1.3 trillion, plus shipping and handling. Europe wanted a deal. What it got was a receipt. Forgive to the less the colonial boomerang. Serious. Let's rewind to where this all began. No, not Scotland, further back. Back to the post-World War II era, when the US unwrapped the Marshall Plan, like Santa Claus with a long-term contract. Analytical, low-interest loans, unlimited access to American markets, and generous military protection, all wrapped in shiny democratic packaging. It was the West's velvet glove, enticing the socialist bloc to jump ship. Look, democracy equals prosperity. Sarcastic. How convenient. Ironic. Of course, it wasn't free. Europe's economic miracle was made in America. They didn't just build a continent, they leased it. And now the rent's due. The so-called sovereignty of Europe? That's cute. When the EU strikes a $750 billion energy deal with the US, you'd expect someone to ask, whose money is that? Spoiler. The European Commission doesn't have money. Will Germany pass the hat around? Will Macron Venmo the Pentagon? Serious. Even now, Europe clings to illusions, still pretending to lead when it's clearly following. Following high gas prices, high defence imports, and high dependency. A prosperous continent that can't even heat itself without asking Uncle Sam. Sarcastic. Congratulations. The same continent that once colonised the global south is now a colony of LNG contracts and military pacts. The colonial boomerang has returned, only this time it's heading west. Reflective. So what's left? A Europe once feared and admired now finds itself kneeling in trade negotiations, pleading for lower tariffs while opening wide its markets and its wallets. Firm. That, dear viewers, is not a partnership. That's a managed decline. And as history whispers, the higher the pedestal, the harder the fall.